an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Wizard's Dilemma, pages 193 to 245, basically until the beginning of late Tuesday evening. In this episode, I am going to talk about what it is that Nita is doing, which I find to be really alarming, even though I know it's sanctioned and everybody says it's okay. It worries me, kids. It worries me. What can I say? Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. So, you know what? I'm realizing again that I lied. Till the beginning of Tuesday evening, not late Tuesday evening. God, I am never going to be able to get this right. This should just be the joke that every intro for this book, I will get it wrong. And that's just going to be the thing. I really tried. God damn it. I even said the page numbers. Oh, well. First off, thank you to Yama for commissioning this episode. All right, so first things first. Finally, Kit and Nita talked. Can I tell you how relieved I was? It's a fair amount into this section before they talk, too. I genuinely was getting worried that they might not speak until like the last few chapters of the book at this rate. I started to wonder if this was going to be some sort of like sitcom-y, every time she thinks to talk to him, she puts it off. And every time that he comes to see her, she's not there until fucking who knows what. I am so relieved that they finally communicate. It was wearing on me, you know? And, I wasn't sure. It seemed like Kit was dealing with it pretty well, but I felt like if this continues for any further period, he's going to really think that she's avoiding him. And he even says that at one point. He says, wow, I was beginning to wonder if you were avoiding me. Thank God you're there. All right. Let's start with Monday morning and afternoon. Again, with her waking up and not checking her messages or responding to him because she has this plan in mind already. So she has worked on this spell matrix, which is one of the things that, like, when Kit is trying to get in touch with her mentally, he can hear her doing this, like, rhythmic thing, which it turns out is this. And this is the description of this is really cool. To a wizard far enough along in her learning to think in the speech, and used to seeing the underpinnings of power beneath mere appearance, it looked two ways. One was a complex interwoven glitter and shimmer of strands of light with 9 prominent knots showing, each one a receptor site into which a, quote, free wizardry could be offered up. But the other semblance, which had made it easier for Nita to work with the wizardry in its later stages, was a charm bracelet, though one with no charms on it as yet. The manual suggested it would take time for her to choose the spells she needed and mate them successfully to the matrix. Nita hoped it wouldn't take as long as the manual suggested it might. She needed to hurry. Now, let's be honest here. Whenever she says something like that, I start to get real antsy. I just don't like knowing that she's rushing. I know that I understand the reason behind it. Of course I do. But this is just not the time to be doing it. It doesn't, and I use the word rushing because it's her constantly thinking about how long things take. But I'm not even sure that's entirely fair because it did seem like she was understanding the need to be extremely careful. So I'm not sure that that's actually, but it just kind of gives me a little bit of anxiety, and it feels like, forgive me, I'm going to move my mic here real quick. It feels a little bit to me like it's planting the seeds for later on when she does kind of push things or get a little careless or a little reckless for the sake of time. It feels like Schrodinger's, not Schrodinger, that's Schrodinger's cat. What's the other one? Chekhov's gun. It feels a little bit like that. Like we're getting reminders periodically of her maybe not taking things as seriously as, or not even as seriously. That's not it either. She is just maybe going to be a little bit blinded by her panic when it comes down to it. It potentially could work out that way. And I'm not saying it will. I hope I'm wrong, but it is making me nervous. So she comes downstairs and Doreen is noticing that she's done with it already and is a little bit surprised. Doreen says, Nita says, this is, next time you think of accusing me of doing anything. Oh, wait a second. Did I cover this part already? Yes, I did. Monday night, Tuesday morning. See, why does she label her chapters like this? Oh, God, you guys, I feel like such a dope. But, all right, so I'm confused because the chapter that I just read began with her waking up, and so does Monday night, Tuesday morning, and she wakes up after midnight. That's why I'm all confused. So she goes and checks on Doreen, who is still asleep. She goes and makes herself a sandwich and then eats it extremely quickly because basically she's looking at food as fuel right now. She just needs to make sure that she has something in her stomach before she goes and does her thing. She went to her desk to pick up the few small standalone wizardries that she thought would be useful for this exercise. One at a time, she hooked each of them to a different link of the charm bracelet, a small gold house key, a little silvery disc with the letters GCT intertwined on one side, and the number 25 on the other, a tiny stylized lightning bolt, a pebble, a little megaphone. Nita pulled out her transit wizardry and changed its time-space coordinates, triggering the fail-safe features that would abort the spell if anyone was standing in the target area. Then she dropped the circles to the floor and stepped through, pulling it after her as she went. So she winds up in Grand Central Station. And it's pretty late, but it's not closed yet. It's just slowed way down. And she is heading to track 25, and it says she felt around in the back of her mind for another wizardry she'd prepared earlier, lying there almost ready to go. Nita said the 35th word, and the air around her rippled and misted over in a peculiar, half-mirrored way. Whoever looked at her would see only what was directly behind her. She was effectively invisible now. I think that's so cool. I really like that, like, the emphasis of her, It's an emphasis less on, she went sort of transparent or, it's more about everything behind her is the only thing anyone sees, which one could say effectively is the same thing, but it feels different to me. It feels more like, in the Dresden Files, he's made a couple of potions that make you less noticeable. Like you just sort of blend into the background. It's one of the first potions that he makes, I think, in like the first book, where he just doesn't, or maybe the second book, he just doesn't really stand out to people, and they sort of like their eyes pass over him without really noticing him or registering any identifying features. And this sort of reminds me of that a little bit, where it's like less of an emphasis on making you disappear and more of an emphasis on everything around you being what's noticed instead, And I don't know. I think that's cool. So she goes down the platform and she is walking towards the world gate and accidentally stumbles over somebody. And it turns out that it is a cat. Riao was the leader of the Grand Central World Gate Supervision Group, all of whose members were cats, since only feline wizards can naturally see the hyperstring structures on which world gates are constructed. What now? I want to know so much more about this. This is one of those moments where I'm just like, bitch, you can't just drop me a sentence like that and then just leave it there. What do you mean? Tell me all about this. What's going on with these cats? What's going on with the fucking strings, the hyperstring structures? I want to know all about this. I would especially love it. And maybe this makes me a little childish. I don't know. But I would especially love it if she was like, oh, and you can tell that a cat sees that when it does this, which you might have seen your house cat do. Very like childish Roald Dahl sort of thing. But nevertheless, I really enjoy like little details like that. I think they're fun. So she looks at the, Riao is looking at the opening in the air. And she says, now there's a configuration you don't see every day. And Nita has to be like, Carl okayed it, which I was like, I'm sure Riao knows that. And Riao says, good timing on your part. This gate's been getting 3 times the usual use while the others are moving around. Penn Station is being moved into a new building across 8th Avenue, and the gates have to go too. We've had our paws full. So Riao tells her that she wanted to make sure that the gate behaved itself when she brought it online. Meanwhile, watch how you go and watch how you handle what you find. We can bring danger with us even to a training session, so you be careful. So she goes through, and she finds herself on the opposite platform, still in Grand Central. And she's looking around and is like, where did Riao go? Not seeming to get it right away. It takes a little while before she realizes there is nobody here because this is the training ground. It just looks like where she was, and continues to do so. Like as she's walking around, everything is an exact replica of New York City. It's just that there are no people. There's no vehicles moving around, nothing. This is one of those things. There are so many movies, of course there are, in which New York City is suddenly vacant, right? I mean, one of the most famous examples is I Am Legend, where they had to pay some obscene amount of money to get 20 minutes of filming time in Times Square, where they kept all of the traffic out and it was just their film crew. And it was a pretty big deal. Times Square being totally empty is just not something you hear about, But I don't think that any movie gets across what it's like to be somewhere familiar and have it feel so off to you. Like if you didn't grow up in New York, I don't feel like it could have the same effect watching it on screen. And even watching it on screen isn't going to be the same thing as being there. I'm going to give a small example of something that for me really freaked me out. I don't know what happened here either. This is the thing. It was just the coalescing of a bunch of different coincidences. But the other night I was walking through my neighborhood, and my neighborhood, there is always something happening. There's cars driving around. There's dogs barking outside. There's kids running around. There's people going outside for a smoke. There are people going to and from their cars. There's, you can hear people from inside their houses talking. There's always something. And the other night I was walking, and I had my headphones on listening to an audiobook, and I noticed like something was throwing me off, and I like turned off my audiobook and walked without it turned on for a minute because, especially if you're a woman, there are times when your hearing being impaired is not a good idea. You're like, okay, I need to be focused here because something's up and I need to be aware of my surroundings. And I had that feeling, but I'm looking around and there's nobody. And I was like, why do I feel so like weirded out and nervous all of a sudden? And then I began to realize that it was only, I think, maybe like 10:30 at night. And I'm walking through this like close packed neighborhood, houses pretty close together. And I did not see a single soul. There were lights on in the houses, but I didn't see the shadows of people moving. Not a single car passed me driving on the street. Nobody sitting out front having a smoke. No dogs barking, which is particularly unusual. No kids. No shouts that you can hear from the backyard or music. Nothing. And it was so eerie, and it took me, like, this is exactly what happens with Nita in this scene. It took me so long to understand what was freaking me out. And it was just the fact that it almost felt like I was walking through a model neighborhood. Like, you know how they'll have those in situations where you're like buying a house and they have like an area for you to go look at the various houses you can pick from to have built or whatever. It felt like that, like the lights were on inside as a means to make it look as if there were people at home. But it felt like I was the only person left on the face of the earth. And it was just an odd feeling. And I really got myself creeped out. Like, once I got out of that, it's sort of like a loop, this neighborhood. And when I came back out of the loop, back onto the main road and some cars drove by, it was like this relief, almost as if I felt as if I had fallen into some other dimension. It felt a little bit like something from like a Stephen King novel or something. So that's what I kept thinking about throughout the scene as Nita is like walking and there's like a breeze. It's not as if there's no atmosphere here or anything. Eventually she plays with weather for quite a while. So that's not it. But there is an absence of people and of sounds that at first she tries to tell herself when she hasn't put her finger on what it is. Okay, fine. Weirdness I can handle. But as it continues, she begins to genuinely be like, maybe I can't. This is just like nigh unbearable. So she's like thinking, okay, is this the lone power? And she puts her senses out trying to see that. Does not appear that that is the case. And finally she goes to the manual and reads this thing. And I just have to read it, guys. Ascetic Spaces Habituation and Manipulation Routine. Introduction. You have now successfully entered the first of a series of ascesis or live proof continua that have been made available to you. I think live proof, probably. Successful handling and manipulation of this continuum will result in your being offered the next one in the series. You are cautioned not to remain past your assigned time. Time warnings embedded in your manual may not function properly. So then it has her like look at her watch, and that seems to give her the countdown. Your goal. Each universe or continuum possesses a kernel or core which contains a master copy of its physical laws and the local laws of wizardry. This master copy is a single complex statement in the speech that lists all properties of matter and energy in the local universe and the values for which these properties are set. To manipulate physical law on a universal scale, whether temporarily or permanently, the universe or continuum kernel first must be located. To avoid easy alteration of natural laws by local species, world kernels are normally hidden. This universe's kernel has been concealed in a routine manner. You must find the kernel before your allotted time elapses. You must then use the kernel to change the local environment. If you cannot find the kernel within the time allowed, this assignment will be offered to you again in one planetary rotation of your home world or one idiopathic cycle appropriate to your species. So, once a day. And she's like, all right, let's do this. And she's walking around trying to figure out where the heart of this place could possibly be. And she knows that if she asked various people, they would all give different answers as to where they thought. I kind of wondered if it wasn't going to be somewhere in Central Park, but it turns out that it is Times Square, which does make a ton of sense. If you've ever been to Times Square, it is a hard thing to explain. It feels like a nightclub all the time, but a nightclub that's like owned by a million conglomerates because of all the advertisements. But you could be there at 1 o'clock in the morning and it's as bright as day. The amount of light pouring down. There's even like a bunch of risers there now that people can like go up on to take photos and stuff. It's a weird spot that does kind of feel like the beating heart of things. So that makes so much sense. So she's looking around and she's trying to figure out like why things, it says it was missing something basic that her own version of New York had. And eventually she realizes that it's the sound. So she sits down and decides that in order to sort of like in order to figure out where the kernel is, she probably will need to use a sense, like more than just like logic, right? And the sound not being here feels like it's not, makes it feel like this isn't a real place. So her logic is sort of vague here, but what I feel like what she's thinking is she believes that without the sound, New York isn't itself. So if she does add sound, that will make it more what it is. And it follows that will also be a means to finding the heart of the place, because that adds such a huge, important dimension to it being real. So she sits, listens, and she decides to tune in. The horn said everybody honked even though it was illegal. The particular way the tires hissed on the road in hot weather when the surface got a little sticky in the sun. The sound of trucks backing up and making that annoying, high-pitched beep, beep, beep. Air brakes hissing. Car engines revving as the lights changed. Sirens in the distance. One by one, in her mind, she added the sounds to the silence. There was a kind of music to it, a rhythm. Footsteps on the road and on the sidewalks created some of that. So did the rattle of those bikes with the little wagons attached that the guys from the stores used to deliver groceries. And so did the voices. People talking, laughing, shouting at one another in the street. Those sounds blended with others and started to produce that low hush of sound like a river. It wasn't a steady sound. It ebbed, then flowed again, rising and falling, slowly becoming that long, slow, low, rushing throb that was the sound of the city breathing. And this is when she begins to hear something. And I like that she thinks of it as the sound that she heard in class once when they played the magnified sound of blood flowing through an artery. Kind of, quote, a windy growl, which I don't know if you guys have heard that, but that's a great description of what it sounds like, a windy growl. Very, very accurate in my opinion. So she begins to follow this low noise and eventually comes out in Times Square and has to narrow it down within that a little bit more. So she feels her way and then finds this spot in the stone, and it's clearly coming from behind that. She just has to figure out how to get it out. So she has that one spell on her bracelet that is associated with the charm that looks like a key. It says it was a molecular dissociator, a handy thing for someone who'd locked themselves out or needed to get into something that didn't have doors or windows. Nita gripped the charm. It fed the wizardry into her mind, ready to go. All she had to do was speak the words in the speech. She said them, put her hands up against the stone, feeling the molecules slip aside, then reached her hands through the stone, carefully, since she wasn't sure if what she was reaching for was fragile. She needn't have worried. So she gets her hand on the thing, and it's this sort of ball of like light that's actually tons of little knots. It was a glittering tangle of light about the size of a grapefruit, a structure so complex that she could make nothing of it at a single glance. And that was just as it should be. Because this is basically something that's determining all of the law of this place. It should be almost incomprehensible. So Nita's feeling it in her hand and is realizing how this thing interacts with absolutely everything. And that if she just does something as simple as squeeze it, it will change the way this universe functions. So that is what she decides to do. And I was honestly like, guys, I'm feeling the same way about this that I felt with Dareen when she was on that planet. Just building shit willy-nilly with no particular concern for the long-term consequences just makes me super nervous. And I know the whole point of this world, not Dareen's, but this one, is that she can do things without there being long-term consequences. I understand that. But I can't help feeling like that's just impossible. Like there's always consequences, you know? It's just a really difficult thing for me to divorce from my mind. And I don't know if you go in someplace like that with a mindset like mine, how that winds up working out. But Nita gives it a squeeze and she feels her hand sort of sinking into it, as if the kernel is adapting to her and her mind. It's wild. This is such a cool thing. The control structures of the kernel fitted themselves to her. Her mind lit up inside with a sudden inrush of power, a webwork of fire, the graphic representation of the natural laws of this universe, of its physics, mathematics, and all the mass and energy inside it. And she knew it was hers to command. For a minute, she just stands there with it, just like, God damn. This is just... she's realizing that this is something that she could spend all day playing with and toying with. And she has to kind of calm herself down from... I don't know if it's a feeling of panic. It just says it was almost too much. And the power is intoxicating. And it's just sort of barely leavened by the knowledge that this isn't a real place. This is just meant to be something small for her to handle. And that's kind of it. And that when I said at the start of this that I was alarmed, that was what I was talking about, is the fact that her reaction to this power is to be thrilled by it in that way. It just seems very like Dareen-ish. And Dareen seems to have sort of like managed herself and gotten to come back down to earth and to, pun intended, and to the realization of what the long-term consequences could have been. But Dareen was just like, she was on such a precipice there for a minute. And I just don't want Nita going there too. So she squeezed the kernel harder and she pulls in clouds and begins to create a storm. It is really rad. The clouds continue to like pull towards her and pile up over her in the sky, bouncing practically off of one another in this like excitement and potential energy that's waiting to be released. And finally, she lets it loose and she tells the storm to go nuts. And it basically like hits the Empire State Building with lightning like several times and rain comes bucketing down. Thunderclaps like gigantic gunfire crashed and rattled among the steel cliffs and glass canyons. And where Nita pointed her finger, the lightning struck to order.
She made it rain in patterns and pour down in buckets, but not a drop of it soaked through her clothes. The water had no power over her. And when some of the electrical signs started to jitter and spark because of all the water streaming down them, Nita changed the behavior of the laws governing electricity so that current leaped and crept up the rain and into the sky, a slower kind of lightning, sheeting it up as well as down. Well, damn. In a triumph, Nita splashed and jumped in the flooding gutters like a kid, then finally ran right out into the middle of the empty Times Square and whirled there in the wet gleam and glare all alone, briefly half nuts with the delight of what she'd done as the brilliant colors of the lights painted the puddles and wet streets and sidewalks with glaring electric pigment, light splashing everywhere like Technicolor water. The feeling of power was a complete blast, though Nita reminded herself that this was just a step on the way to something much bigger. So this is just so very similar to what Kit is experiencing. It's just that her world she walked into that was set up already. But it like and Kit's stay. So this is meant to be sandboxed away from everything so that it doesn't have a lasting consequence. Whereas Kit's are lasting. They go on. Which we will talk about that in a bit. But the fact that she manages this is really a high for her. And part of what she is enjoying is the fact that she can just make the storm do anything she wants without having to worry about particular consequences. And part of her wishes that that was how it was all the time. Reality would be more work, but it would be more satisfying, though not all that different. For bioelectricity was just lightning scaled down, after all, and every cell in the body was mostly water. Now Nita stood there in the cool air as the sun started to set in the cleared sky behind the skyscrapers and looked again at the tangle of power that she held, this whole universe's soul. On a whim, as she looked down at it, Nita altered its semblance as she'd altered the look of the spell matrix she wore. Suddenly, it wasn't a tight-packed webwork of light she was holding, but a shiny red apple, which is very interesting. I wonder if this is supposed to be akin to like the, Garden of Eden apple. Like, is there a metaphor happening here, or is that just an image that came to mind? Or is it about the computer thing? Is she kind of paying an ode to Doreen there? I wonder if that's because that seems like what this author likes to do is bring the apple in without a bite out of it. So she's done with her test here, and she goes to hold her hand up to the stone wall to put it back. And she thinks that it's going to maybe jump out of her hand into its spot, but it doesn't. And she realizes that it's kind of lonely and it enjoys being put to use and doesn't really want to go back. So she has to actively put it back in. And she has a half hour to spare. She comes out on the Grand Central platform again, and it is 3:00 in the morning, and she is so exhausted. Nita walked off the platform out into the main concourse, where a guy with a wide pad broom was pushing some sweeping compound along the shiny floor, and out past him invisible and up the ramp to push open the doors and stand on 42nd Street again. This time, there was traffic, and garbage in the gutter, and horns honking. This time the streetlights were bright. This time the sidewalks were full of people hurrying, heading home from clubs or a meal after the movies, hailing cabs, laughing, talking to each other. As Nita dropped her transit circle onto the sidewalk, out of the way of the pedestrians, the wind coming down 42nd flung a handful of rain at her, like a hint of something happening somewhere else or about to happen. I love that piece of writing, you guys. I don't know. All the wording of it flung a handful of rain at her. It's poetical. I like it. And I really do understand too, after being someplace that you feel is like familiar, but isn't, you want the reassurance before you go home. Like, I completely get that. That's what I was describing when I said that I came out onto the main road and cars passed by, and I was like, oh, thank God. Like, you know, it's fine, but there's still a part of you that's like, ugh, but that was weird though. So she goes home and passes out and gets woken up by her father, who's like, dude, it's 8:30. You know that, right? I don't know what time her school starts, but my school day started at 7:30. So she would have been an hour late. It seems because she misses her first class that she does have to be about an hour late. So she goes to class and she's sitting there when all of a sudden Kit butts into her mind, and she kind of jumps in reaction, and everybody in class turns to stare at her and is just kind of wondering what the hell's going on. And this keeps coming up like later on. There's this thing happening here that I want to talk about, but we will get to it. So, Kit says, where have you been? Don't you answer your manual anymore? And she's about to snap at him and then is like, oh God, that's why we're fighting in the first place. And she says, look, I'm really sorry. It's all my fault. All of it? Kit said, wow, didn't think you were going to go that far. And there's just this really nice, like, making up of the two of them. And when you had a fight with a good friend, I really love how you will build up what the apology has to be in your head. You create this like script for yourself of all of these paragraphs of things that you were going to say. And oftentimes when you see the person, you don't need to say any of it. They get it and you get it, and it's okay. And that's not to say don't apologize. If somebody really loves you, they don't need you to. They'll get it. That's not what I mean. It's just when you are genuinely sorry and you know you fucked up, I think that comes across to people and they can sense that. So you begin to start this whole rigmarole and they're just like, you know what? We don't need to do it. I get it. Thank you. Apology accepted. And I just really liked how easy this was. So then she starts thinking, and I kind of liked this because it's a bit unexpected. She starts thinking about involving Kit in this and asking herself, well, do you think he's even going to want to help? And then she's like, well, if he doesn't help, she just starts to get very doubtful of her own intentions in asking him, on what he's going to think if she does ask for help, what his answer is going to be, and if he'll even want to help after everything that's happened. And I'm just like, girl, of course he's still going to want to help. Like, you guys had a little bit of a spat over a spell. Your mother is dying. Of course he's going to be there for you. And she says, even if I asked him, would he think I was just asking because? And she gets cut off here. And I'm wondering what that was about. Does she think that he is going to believe she's just doing this because she feels bad? But she gets this, there's this moment that's interrupted. Mr. Neary, her teacher, is asking her for the date of Gettysburg, but the way he phrases it is, Gettysburg, got a date? And somebody says, yeah, but he'll have to stand on a box to reach, said a voice in the back of the room, just loud enough for Nita to hear. And Nita answers the question correctly. And she is a little bit annoyed here. And it says there were a number of guys in her classes who thought it weird or funny that Nita hung around with a boy younger than she was. And Ricky Chan was the tallest and handsomest of them. His dark good looks annoyed her almost as much as his attitude, and Nita couldn't think which satisfied her more. The fact that everyone around her knew she thought he was intellectually challenged, which drove Ricky nuts, or that if he ever really annoyed her, she could at any moment grab him by his expensive black leather jacket and dump him and it into one of several capacious pockets of other space that numerous alien species were presently using as a garbage dump. I love that whole sentence. That delighted me no end. So this is one of those things that her getting teased, I am assuming here, because of the way that, kids are trash. This is a signal that guys are kind of becoming into her. And later on, she gets some compliments, and I put them in quotes because ew. And between that and the fact that this dude knows that she thinks he ain't shit, there is no more surefire fucking recipe for a dude becoming interested in you, especially a guy with kind of an ego, than for them to know with no shadow of a doubt that not only are you not interested, but you view them with something bordering on contempt. And I say this as a woman who, when I was younger, was frequently absolutely baffled at how I could talk shit into a guy's face about himself and think that would have been enough to send him packing. And then I turn around and he's right the fuck behind me, following me around, still, even after that. And that's because some dudes really, really enjoy the challenge of getting somebody to like them that doesn't. Because, especially, like I said, a guy with a big ego, they are not used to that. So it gets their attention. And the problem there is that eventually, if they do wind up managing to get you to like them, they lose interest because that was the thing that made you stand out from everyone else. And now you're not doing that. So it's, one of those things. But I like that this winds up coming up a little bit later. So she's walking out of class later, and the loudest one says, "Hey, Miss Juanita, where'd you send away for those legs? Yeah, nice butt, nice face. Shame about the giant bulging brain." And I'm like, yeah, they are very into her. They're making fun of her brain because there's nothing else to make fun of, which means that they are reaching. So all I'm saying is good for you, Nita. So there are species who would love these guys, said Kit, as a condiment. And as they're walking away, one of them yells, "Oh, look at him. He's not wasting any time." And it says Kit frowned. The laughter suddenly broke off in what sounded like a number of simultaneous coughing fits. "Kit," Nita said. Kit didn't stop frowning, just took Nita discreetly by the elbow and started to walk. If they're going to sneak out behind the bleachers in the field at lunchtime and smoke, it's not all my fault if it starts catching up with them. Oh my God. I love it so much. Thank you, Kit. Thank you. Appreciate you. So she tells him, finally. And I thought this was so beautifully written because I am dead serious here. While I was listening to this, I knew what she was leading up to. And all I could think is when I have had to deliver like earth-shattering bad news, I want to be able to do it in as gentle a way as possible. And there's just no way to do that. Like, you can't ease your way into saying this. You've got to, like, eventually you're just going to have to say the words. And also, when I have done that, I had thought I would be able to say it while we're eating dinner, talk about it while we're in the car, over the phone. And it's always, I have to sit down and say all of the words while seated with my full attention on the words. And it's so crazy. These thoughts are just running through my mind in hypotheticals as I'm reading this section. And then we get to this spot. All the things she'd been intending to say when the subject came up now went out of her head. "My mother has a brain tumor," Nita said. Kit stopped short. "What?" She told him, fighting to keep her face from crumpling towards tears as she did so. She'd meant to keep walking while she told him, but she found it impossible. Everything came out in a rush that paradoxically seemed to take her entire attention. Kit just stood there staring at Nita until she ran down. "Oh my God," he said in a strangled voice. And this is when they get interrupted and he makes those guys start coughing, and I was not mad at him for that. So he asks her, "Why the fuck didn't you call me when this happened?" And she says, "I didn't want to call you just because I needed you." And I love this sentence. Nita stopped. Earlier, that had seemed to make some kind of sense. Now, it seemed inexpressibly stupid. "You're right," she said then. "I've been having a complete brain holiday." And Kit, for his part, is extremely angry that Tom and Carl didn't tell him. And she has to be like, "Dude, of course they didn't. What are you talking about? Like, that's their whole, they can't violate privacy like that. This was a personal, like, of course they didn't. And they didn't tell me what was going on with you either. So that's how this shit works." So he says, "What are we going to do?" And I love that she really takes note of the fact that he says we. So Nita says, you need it for the practice universes, and I don't have much time. They operate tomorrow or Thursday at the latest. That's the best time to do the wizardry, when she's not awake. You're going to need someone to backstop you," Kit said. That thought had been on Nita's mind. Strange, though, how she now felt some resistance to the idea. "Look, if I can just..." "Neats." Kit stopped, looked at her. "This is your mom. You can't take chances. You're going to have to spend almost all your free time in those other universes, and you're going to be wrecked. And I bet Tom and Carl told Doreen to butt out, didn't they?" And she's like, "Yeah." Suddenly, Nita felt more tired than she'd been even in school. And when he says backstop you, I'm not entirely sure what that means. Like, I guess this is the transfer of energy thing, but I don't know for sure because there's not details here. I don't know if we've heard this before and I've just forgotten about it, but there's something that she mentions a little bit later that makes me think that's what it is. So Kit, she invites him to go to the hospital with her and her dad and Doreen later, but he can't go that evening because he's got really set plans with his parents. I feel like if he told his dad, he would be able to get permission. But, I understand that she needs another opportunity to go practice for the story. So, and he goes home and after telling her, "Tell your mom I'll see her tomorrow." And Nita goes home and sees her dad hanging up the phone. And the doctor has just called and told them that they're going to have to reschedule the surgery. One of the specialists they need, the doctor who does the imaging, had some kind of emergency and had to fly to Los Angeles. He'll be back in a day, they said, but I'm not wild about the idea of your mother being operated on by someone who might be jet-lagged. Nita threw a look at Doreen, who just nodded once. There were ways to add so much energy to another human being that they might have a whole solar system's worth of lag and not be affected. This was one of the simplest wizardries, and not beyond Doreen's abilities right now, no matter what else might be going on. So I think that's what backstopping is, but I'm not positive. Also, the doctor does the imaging, which I had assumed was dealing with x-rays and CAT scans and whatnot, but he's saying whoever it is going to be doing the surgery on her. So I guess I don't understand what imaging means, is what I'm saying. Because otherwise, whether they have jet lag, it's probably not going to be, I wouldn't think, such a make or break role in everything. But, I could be wrong about that. Maybe it's absolutely crucial that it be exact. So they go see her mom, and she's realizing like her mom has all of these paperbacks piled up around her, and a lot of them are kinds of like thrillers, and she's surprised by that and is like, are your tastes changing? And her mother says, I just read the parts with all the shooting and blowing things up, and then I imagine doing that to the tumor when I'm not hitting it with lightning bolts and setting it on fire. Guided imagery is a good tool to use to help with this, they say. Whether it actually makes it go away or not, it's a way to constructively use the tension. One of the therapists has been coaching me in how to do it. It gives me something to do when my eyes give out. Which is really interesting. It feels like and she winds up saying this later, actually, when Nita explains to her what she's going to do. It feels a little bit like magic, you know? So Nita explains to her mother everything about like rewriting the rules and talking to the cancer. And her mom is like, you know what? I mean, I don't feel like it can hurt anything. So if you want to try it, go ahead. But you know that I'm going to have to go through surgery either way. And she's like, yeah, I mean, it's one thing for me to tell them to not do what they're doing. It's another thing for there to be a mass in your head. Like you still will, even if the cancer stops growing, it's still going to be putting pressure on your brain. Like, definitely let a doctor do that. So she asks Doreen at this point, are you helping with this? And Doreen just says no and gets up and like walks away. And her mom is like, fuck, what did I say? And she has to explain how helpless and useless Doreen feels. And her mom is like, yeah, I fucking get that. And she says, I guess it's tougher to deal with than running around from planet to planet having fun. And Nita gets really irritated at this point, which I deeply understand. It's really hard when you're young and you have more capacity than the average person your age, and your parents don't even give you the respect of thinking that you have the usual capacity. You just get so irritated at being underestimated, at being not taken seriously. It is insulting, and it makes you feel like they don't see you because you're making progress and they apparently are unaware of it. And Nita has to explain all of these like really intense things they've been through. And her mother is like, I mean, I guess I haven't been taking it seriously enough, so I'm sorry. But I don't understand if this is like how it is for you, all of this terrible shit. Why do you do it? And it says Nita shook her head, not knowing where to begin. The rush you got from talking the universe out of acting one way and into acting another, with only the speech and your intention for tools. To know what song the whales sing and to help them sing it. To stand in the sky and look down on the world where you worked and be able to make a difference to it and know that you did. Even in the speech, there were no words for that. And helping others do the same thing, particularly when spelling with a partner. It doesn't always hurt, Nita said. There's so much about it that's terrific. Remember when we took you to the moon? And she says, you know, sweetie, sometimes I wake up and think I just dreamed that. Then Doreen comes in with that computer walking behind her. So I really liked this whole talk. And let's see. Mom, a lot of energy goes into making wizards what they are. We have a responsibility to life, to what made it possible for us to be wizards in the first place. If you just take that power and use it while everything's going okay, and then afterward decide you don't like the hard part and just dump it all and walk off, things die faster if you do that, and it does happen. But sometimes it's real hard to stay willing. I am not going to just let this thing kill you without doing something to stop it, Nita said to her mother in the speech, in which it is, if not impossible, at least most unwise to lie. Her mother shivered. I heard that. Good trick when it's not in a language I know. But you do know it, Nita said. Everything knows it. On some level, even your cancer knows it. And I'm going to do everything I can to talk it out of what it's doing to you. So this is all amazing. I'm realizing I have 5 minutes left to talk about what Kit does. So let's go over here. We have first the biopsy, which comes back positive. And she goes and tells Doreen that she has a role to play, and it might not be the one she wants, but she needs to be with their mother and not let her be alone. So Kit heads out to the universes. And this is, it says, let's see. He found a good-sized section discussing the theory and structure of the practice universes, but no information of how to get into them. Access to the aesthetic continua and to more detailed information is released on a need-to-go basis, the manual said. Consult your area advisory for senior for advice and assessment. So he's thinking about Nita's mother. And like, I was really touched at how close to her he also seems. He says that he couldn't imagine a world without her mother in it, and he knows that Nita can't either. And really, that's like a pretty amazing thing, because I have a lot of friends whose parents, were they gone, it would make no difference to me. And I mean, obviously, as an adult, you have a very different situation than you do as a kid. But even when I was a kid, the only person whose friends, like the only friends' parents I knew, they were like uninvolved enough that I don't know what it would have been like without them either. I just don't feel like it would have affected me this way. It would have on their behalf, on my friend's behalf, but not to me also the way that it is with Kit. And I really think that's sweet. So they go into this other world, and it's just this dim gray fog. And Kit's looking around and is like, why, like, I feel like I was summoning something else and I didn't get what I was looking for. Did you ask for this? And Ponch is like, no, definitely not. And Ponch says he can smell something because they're about to leave, and he tells Kit, not yet. And he says, it smells like you, but it's not you. And there's this weird rustling. And Kit remembers these like creatures from his childhood memories that were in shadow and terrified him. And he like remembers how they didn't have any particular shape to them. They weren't of a particular form. And he's wondering, like, have they come here to get me? Like, did I manifest them? I don't understand what could have happened. If I run away now, they win. No way I'm going to let that happen. I'm a wizard. And I'm more than that. I'm 13. I got over these things years ago. So this thing comes at him. And Kit gasped, fell about in the back of his mind for a wizardry that would save him, then abruptly stopped because nothing was towering up anywhere. The scrabbling noises were still going on all around him and getting louder, but whatever these things were, they weren't his night terrors. And he begins to see them a little bit more clearly and believes that they are a millipede, which I have to tell you guys is so much worse than the thing that he was like describing, at least in my opinion. I've like physically recoiled at this point. I just, no, thank you. No, thank you. So it cruises along toward him. And Kit says, I'm on errantry and I greet you in the speech. The millipede paused, reared half its body up off the ground, and faced the two of them, its legs working in midair. But there was no sense of recognition, no reply. The creature dropped down again and went flowing on past him and Ponch, all those legs making a tickly shuffling sound as it went. All its friends went flowing away after it, the little legs rustling and bustling softly along the floor. And Ponch is like, what the hell? Why did you make those? And Kit's like, I don't know if I did. And Ponch is like, it's just us two. One of us had to do it, and I know I didn't do it. And I find that extremely curious. So Kit decides that he is going to go first and walk through several of the universes that he has made. And he is getting like details correct now that he knows that these aren't going away, and is just trying to put a little bit more effort in. I don't have any time left, but I really wanted to talk about how, like, what it would be like to know that you get an answer to why are we here, and it turns out that somebody just made you by accident while they were messing around and didn't know that it was going to stick, and that is like the most unsatisfying thing I've ever heard. But eventually he makes the squirrel world for Ponch again, and Ponch notices how quickly it comes to hand and mentions to Kit that maybe was able to do it more quickly because he has seen it before. And Kit is very interested in the fact that Ponch is making these like astute assessments and wonders if it's Ponch or himself that is changing and getting smarter or better able to understand. So they walk forward, and eventually he feels on the surface and he pulls up what I believe is the kernel of this world, but he puts it in his pocket. And I have no idea what it means for him to take this out of this world. It's darkness. There's nothing here. So he's not destroying a world. It's like he's destroying the potential of a world. What is this? I can't imagine. So, yeah, he manages to pull it up out of the ground and puts it in his pocket. He's like real wobbly from using all of this energy. And he says to Ponch that he thinks it was calling to him because it was all alone. And I have no idea what this means. So I guess we'll see. So yeah, thank you again, Yama, for commissioning this. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I hope you've been enjoying the episodes. And I will be seeing you soon with a new one. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.